We're now live, Chair.
Thank you. Got technically 1 minute to go. Being live stream, got it. Counting down. Welcome to everybody who is on the live stream right at the beginning. They're obviously very keen if they are. Okay, 6 o'clock, shall we go? Welcome everybody, members, officers, any members of the public who are joining us, welcome. Starting off this evening, I'm going to ask if there are any substitutes or apologies, please.
There's an apology from Councillor Press, and the substitute is Councillor Barnes, Chair.
Mr. Barnes, Councillor Barnes is here. I wondered what we'd done to warrant that. Thank you. So that's just the substitutes and apologies then. Members' interests, can I remind members to disclose any pecuniary or other interests which might relate to the items on the agenda, either now or later when appropriate. Anything to declare at the moment from anybody? I'll assume quiet means no. Admission to the public, as we're streaming anyway, we know that we're not excluding members of the public from this. So moving on to minutes of the meeting on the 30th of June. I think we got them a little while ago. Has anybody got any queries, comments to make on the actual minutes? I'm clicking backwards and forwards and I can't see any hands raised, so I will take it that we don't have any changes to make to those minutes. So would somebody like to propose that we accept those minutes, please? Thank you, Bob. Anybody second? And all those in favour of accepting the minutes? Thank you. Moving on to the substantive items on the agenda. The first item, item 5, is the annual corporate performance report, which was previously presented to Cabinet. And this is our opportunity to comment and respond to it. I think, is it Jez Roberts that you're going to present this one for us?
It is, Chair, yes. Yeah, thanks for that.
Good. Okay, do you want to fire off then, please?
Well, thank you, no problem. Yeah, so this is the annual corporate performance report for 2020-21, which was presented to Cabinet, like I say, back in July. It's based around our usual corporate performance framework, and if I just sort of move to about 4.2 of the Cabinet report, it talks around how we measured ourselves against the northern boroughs. I'll talk a little in a moment about how we're moving forward in the new performance year away from that, but just for information, we ended up against our super key performance indicators, 5th out of the 20 northern boroughs. We have about 16 super key performance indicators, and within those, within the year, about 2/3 of them improved or maintained their performance, and about 60% of them, within 60% of those, we were also first or second quartile. So again, it's a pretty good performance picture, considering obviously the last 12 months, and without saying what that's brought for everyone. The report does highlight some areas of key achievements. Notably, I won't go into too much detail. You've obviously had a chance to read the reports, but in terms of progress 8 score, and also work around tackling obesity with reception age children. There are some areas of challenge as well, which are known to Cabinet, to Scrutiny, and to the senior leadership of the council, and those are highlighted as well, which have been throughout the year, most specifically around housing sufficiency, total crime, and then also now in terms of employment data and the employment rate. Things that are obviously becoming to the fore, certainly on the latter with regards to employment and youth employment, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic, and hence why we're moving forward in the new performance year. We're reflecting some of these issues around youth unemployment, voluntary sector resilience, and economic and business sustainability in the new performance framework, which will come forward at the first opportunity at the half-year report in December this year, and then obviously subsequently at the end of this time next year will be reported in the full year end for that year. As I said at the start of the report, we have since probably about 2014-15 measured ourselves against a benchmark or against a strapline of best borough in the north. But what the last 2-3 years has pretty much shown us is that there are other authorities across England that we need to look perhaps more outside of our own regional cohort. And so what we will be doing is measuring ourselves against accreditable standards, SIPFA benchmarks, against other local authorities, Yorkshire and Humber, all England. And so the new framework will report against that, and will obviously rank our performance in specific areas against that as well. So it was really just to highlight that it has been an unprecedented year. It goes without saying, and I'm not certainly the first or will be the last person to say that. But overall, in terms of the corporate performance framework that we have measured in 2021, it's been a relatively successful year based upon the measures that we've been looking at. And those aren't measures that have been specifically chosen in order to make it easy for ourselves. We constantly challenge and we constantly refresh. Hence why going forward, we will be bringing in areas of performance that are important to the council and to residents, such as employment, third sector resilience, and the sustainability and the viability of economic businesses throughout the borough. So we're happy to take comments regarding the methodology and the framework. I know we met with the chair and deputy chair regarding specific operational issues from the report, but if there are any detailed questions, we will happily take those back if we're unable to answer them this evening from an operational level. Thank you.
Thanks, Jez. I'm pleased you didn't tell us go through every single point on the report, a lengthy and detailed report. Thank you for that. I think it's important we recognise that we've all had a chance to read it and can comment or question accordingly. One of my general points, and I think that I made this point when we had our pre-meeting meeting, if you like, on the subject, just to kick the ideas around, was I think we need as members to be careful about relying totally on the league table side of things, that just because we perhaps move up the league table, and I'm not decrying the efforts of officers here, I'm just putting the data, the statistics in context. Just because we move up the table doesn't necessarily mean that we've improved our performance. Just one example there, the healthy weight measure that we seem to have significantly improved on. The actual fact is, in terms of the data, that our overweight 5-year-olds have slightly increased, actually. So, as I say, not decrying, but just putting in context. I think it's important we recognise that's an issue, not an issue, something to bear in mind when we're looking at the data. Okay, over to members. Questions, comments, please, members.
Councillor Lee has a question, please, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask, are we using hands like I did, or are we using hands electronically?
I find hands work. I'm more like
thank you.
I must admit.
I've just got a question for Jess about this corporate performance report. At first sight, it does seem that we're going in the right direction, and I'm sure everybody's happy about that. However, under summary and the climate emergency in Appendix A, I see that the last time we were measured for air quality, we were 13th out of the 20 northern boroughs. And this more recent measurement, this time, we're still 13th. So we're just treading water with respect to air quality issues. Now, our level, you'll see in that Appendix A, is 4.9 tonnes per person for Calderdale residents. That compares with nearby Oldham, which is something like 3.4 tonnes. So we're 40% more than that. And also, against the background of anticipated developments along the Lower Valley particularly, I just wonder how on earth, if we're standing still now, despite our own declared climate emergency, we're 40% more than Oldham. We're 13th in the list of 20 northern boroughs. We're not making any progress with it. How on earth are we going to achieve our carbon reduction targets when we're not making progress? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Jess, do you want to come back on that one, or a colleague?
I suppose without giving a specific response in terms of the how, other than knowing that the council has, and Councillor Patient is obviously sponsoring quite focused and dedicated work now around climate emergency, and there are an awful lot of measures in place in terms of the inclusive recovery strategy that is looking at sustainable transport and projects that have a climate emergency or a climate change element to it. I suppose what we in the corporate performance team would do would be look to support the tracking and monitoring of the progress of those projects that help towards that net zero by 2038 that the council has stated as its ambition. So.
Sorry, you froze on me there, Jez. I don't know whether you did on other people. I got as far as you were saying in terms of corporate performance team. That's as far as I got. I don't know.
Sorry, right. I was saying, yeah, our role in the corporate performance team then will be to work with services and work with colleagues working in the climate change agenda, Councillor Patient, and that area, and also colleagues working on sustainable travel and the inclusive recovery strategy to track the contribution that those projects are making towards the climate, the council's dedicated commitment to be net zero by 2038.
Okay, thank you for that. Jacob, Councillor Cook, I think you've got a yellow hand raised.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Chair, for the opportunity to ask this question. Just following off the back of what Councillor Lee has just asked, I noticed from the report that you make a claim, the council make a claim to have hit 40% carbon emission reduction by 2020. Presumably that was obviously last year, but you say it's an historic milestone that the council's hit this 40% carbon emission reduction. But then there's no details at all about how you've achieved that, or what that actually means, or how can we verify that figure of 40% has actually been hit? Because it just looks like it's been plucked out of nowhere. So could we have some more details on that? How did you measure the carbon emissions? Was it for every business in the borough? Was it for every individual household in the borough? Was it just the council's own emissions that have been reduced by 40%? And what are the figures? What exactly are the emissions of the council? I can't find any details. So would you be able to answer that?
Yeah, we can arrange for the council's climate change officer, Jez Tweed, to provide some evidence, supporting evidence that substantiates that claim.
Okay, you can organise that for us, Jez, can you?
We can, yes, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So
okay, that's fine. So you don't actually know yourself, it would have to be the officer in charge of that, is that correct?
It is, yeah. The role of the corporate performance, what we produce in the report is we pull together the council's corporate picture and summarise that as succinctly as we can, based upon the information provided by services, and then, but it is, it is open to challenge and scrutiny, and we can provide that for you.
Yeah, I think that if I could get that information, it's very important, because you're making the claim of 40% reduction, but there's no details as to how that's been achieved, or what that means in actual fact. And obviously you were trying to achieve net zero by 2038. But again, we need more details about how you're actually measuring those emission reductions. So if we can get that, that would be fantastic. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's very important, Jacob, the details, but I think it's also fair to Jez to say that's not necessarily, they won't know the details of every single element of it, but it is important that we find out, and we may decide as a result of some of the things which come out of this report that we want to include them as part of our future work programme as a result of it as well. So it's not a putting it on one side, it's recognising we can't answer it at this point, but it's an important question to be answered, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I understand that. I appreciate that. If we can get the details of that, would be fantastic. Thank you.
Good. Bob, I think you were indicating.
Yes, I just wanted to a few general comments. First of all, just on the overall report to which Jez has presented. I think these are very important and very useful reports for members. I expect, you know, there's a lot of detail in this report, but not everything there can be you know, printed out in detail. If we do need more information, that's what we're here to ask for and obtain. I just want to look generally at, particularly, I thought a useful page I thought in the report was bringing it together in the summary and recommendations on page 10 and under section 12, where it refers, as Jed's mentioned, to the unprecedented challenges to local governments being spelt out by COVID-19 and all the other pressures it lists there in 12.1. So it has been, everybody's been working in such a difficult year, and the pressures have just been amazing and enormous that everybody has had to work under. And just under 12.1, it particularly also highlights the ongoing public sector budget restraints that we're so used to after working with. But I do welcome what the report says, that there has been a strong performance by the council over the last 12 months based on this latest data available. Jed did mention on 12.3 on that report that it is the intention, and I think a welcome intention, to widen our benchmarking progress with other local authorities beyond just the north of England. You know, I really think that is important, that we can get just on benchmarking, just got locked into just certain other authorities and not look wider to try to benchmark further. So I think the report might say, but I hope that it will give us a better balanced overview picture when the next report comes through, when this wider range of benchmarking takes place. The concern, and I've seen quite a number of these reports over the years, but still, I think I see on every one, they unfortunately have to zone in on total crimes. There's been a 13.2% reduction, obviously very welcome, but it's still red ranked at 16th out of 20 in the north. That means that we haven't done as well as other local authorities. We haven't seen a bigger reduction to bring that red rating down. Now, I'd have asked if I could look at that further, but I am aware now that this is being put on the Place Scrutiny Board in their work programme when it meets together with the police later. I think it's October. I think it's on their work plan. So that's a piece of work I think we do need to look into, because it's certainly that particular area on total crimes. And I know there has been that reduction, but as I say, possibly not as big as other authorities to be still red ranked at 16th. So I am pleased to see that that's being picked up by another scrutiny board for further work.
Thank you, Bob. Not seeing any other hands at the moment. Have I missed somebody?
Councillor Porritt's got a hand raised. Chair.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Councillor Porritt, please.
Waving with some vigour, but and my little yellow electronic hand, but it's a bit subtle.
Forwards on the screen and you missed things, so please fire away.
Thank you. First of all, I do welcome the idea of expanding the remit of looking beyond the other boroughs in the north, because I think it can be dangerous to think that just because we're doing well balanced against somewhere else that's really struggling, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing the best that we possibly can for the people of Calderdale. One thing that really stands out for me, as much as we're putting all of these things into individual boxes and measuring the data in each area, is how much this stuff intersects, how much things like employment rates, weekly pay, childhood obesity, education levels, healthy life expectancy, how much those things are markers of a more generalised deprivation. And until we deal with deprivation in our communities, and I know that that's not something that we can exclusively do as a council, you know, we're obviously always going to be on the back foot in terms of, you know, working within the national structures. But it really stands out to me that we're looking at markers of inequalities and we're looking at markers of deprivation. And if we can deal with those underlying effects, a lot of this stuff is going to rise up, not on its own, but if we see improvements in one area, it's going to lead to improvements in other areas as well. And it's really just a matter of we've got some really well, healthy, privileged people in Calderdale. We've also got some incredibly left behind communities, and that's really where I want to see the focus of our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Have I missed anybody else, Lauren? You're keeping a good lookout for me. Yes, Sylvia, you want to come in, I think. Councillor Dacre.
Yes, thanks. Just wanted members to have their questions first. I just wanted to go back, firstly, to touch on the CO2 emissions figures. And I think this really ties in with the point that you were making, Councillor Evans, that comparisons are sometimes less helpful than you expect, so that emissions in this particular on that particular point are, I think, accepted to be very difficult to make, because they are to some extent dependent upon geography and landscape, and we have a particularly challenging landscape from the point of view of CO2 emissions, because we've got roads in the bottoms of narrow valleys, and so comparisons should be in that area should be treated with caution. And also, I'd just make the point that we are looking in the local plan to be building new garden suburbs, and one of the aims behind those is to try to build in sustainability and low emissions from the very beginning, or at least the capacity for low emissions, because in many of our existing areas, it's extremely difficult because you can't alter the roads, you can't alter the housing, and you can't obviously alter the geography. So we do hope that new developments, as I say, can be built with these future-proofing requirements in mind. And I'd just say, and I'm sure it must be clear to Councillor Cook, that when you get papers like this, and it's obviously a very high level paper with very little detail, I'm sure officers, including Jez, would be only too happy if you were to contact them when you receive the paper to seek clarification and to get that further detail that you're asking for. So, you know, I'm sure they'd be only too happy to oblige you. You don't really have to wait until you come to the meeting before you raise things. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. I think that's that last point in particular is appropriate for members to take into account. One of my underlying concerns, apart from this league table thing, is that, and accepting that it's very much an overview report in itself, and I take that totally, is the importance of having specific actions and milestones associated with each of the areas for improvement. We highlight where we're going up, where we're going down. We've highlighted areas that we need to do work in, and so according to my notes, there's something like is it 5 or 6 areas where we are sort of 10 or below in the ratings, and those are obvious areas that we want to try and improve on. What I would hope is that when we look at the individual areas, that we do get specific data in relation to how we're moving, which direction, what actions we're going to take to improve that situation, and what the milestones are going to be along that way. I think then we have, as scrutiny in general, not just within this particular scrutiny panel, we have things against which we can measure ourselves, which I think is very important, needs to be part of it. That's my general observation. Councillor Lee, you wanted to come in, I think.
Thanks, Chair. It was just an observation about a comment just made by Councillor Dacre. I don't think that any member of any scrutiny panel, particularly this very important one that we're members of tonight, I don't think anybody should be patronised about trying to find out outside of this meeting some facts and figures, because part of the purpose of being here is that we should all know about reservations that are being expressed by any of the members of all parties. And it's important that those views come to committees like this. Robust scrutiny is absolutely essential. And the more opinions that we hear across this meeting, the better. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Anybody else on this particular item?
Councillor Swift has a question, Chair.
Thank you very much. Megan, over to you. You need your mic on, Megan.
Unmute. Is that?
Sorry, start again.
Thank you. I was saying apologies for being late at the beginning, but time just got in front of me. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and I have to tell you, it's work I couldn't do. But the overall thing that it tells us, is there anything on here that when we look at it, bells should clang in his ears and we'll know that, you know, now it's really, really important. They would still have to have some sort of criteria for what's coming first. But having read this once, and I cannot, I can see the things that other people have discussed. I could go to specific items that I'm more interested in, because we've all got a bit of the council that, you know, you watch more closely than others. But I don't know where this is telling us to go, and I prefer no rude answers, please.
To respond to that, Chair?
Yeah, sorry. Mike, did you want to respond to that?
No, Chair, let's just respond. I've got another point to make.
I'll come to that in any comment, but sorry, I was just making a note. Did somebody say they wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, I will, Chair, if that's okay. Just
right.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Swift. Where it's going to, I suppose it's been mentioned a couple of times. It's an overview of corporate performance across the whole breadth of the council. And I know, you know, cabinet and elected members will have specific portfolios that are clearly of interest to them. Children's social care, obviously being, you know, yours. Throughout the reporting year, what we attempt to do, and it brings back perhaps an earlier point, what we attempt to do is bring through exception reports on all of the indicators, whether they be the super key performance indicators or other supporting measures that give that narrative about what the data is telling us, what we will do to make the improvement, what the service is doing, and what difference that will make to the outcomes of residents. So there is always and we do that, you know, 4 times a year. We do that quarterly. We come twice a year to cabinet and scrutiny, half yearly and annually. But those 4 reports, all those reports are available on our Council DataWorks website. So you can see perhaps there's a breadth of throughout the reporting year of those indicators across the whole spectrum.
Thanks for that, Jez. Councillor Barnes, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, Chair, thanks. I think as a substitute, I think it's right to me to let standing members make comments first before I come in. It does appear to be that every time I sub on this committee, this report comes up. So I'm fairly used to this report by now. I think I've subbed twice, and it's come up on both. Actually, this is the third time I've subbed, and this is the third time this has come up. So I understand it. I think I see this report differently. I see what this report is flagpoles and guide markers. I don't see it as a report to actually interrogate and go through in nth detail, because that's not what this report is about. This report allows us as councillors, us as to go and identify where the work plan is, where to scrutinise, where to take further development. And I think that's what it says. So I think, Councillor Lee has a point in terms of what are we doing in order to get the CO2 emissions down further. That's an absolute valid point within that. But to interrogate the report to that level, I don't think is what this report is. It tells us, it shapes us what we should be looking at future meetings, what the work plan should be, not really interrogating how we got to the figures. The figures are there. The interrogation is, what are we doing about it? How are we improving? What have we done to improve? Are we looking at, for example, if we look at other boroughs which are at, let's take an example of one where we're 13th. Why are 12 better than us? What are they doing that are making them 12 better than us? That's how this report should be viewed to me. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Point taken, I think. I think we just need to be aware that yes, we need to pick up on some of these things. And as you're saying, we will have highlighted some items as it comes through in this report. For example, one of my little detail things was we talk about having improved as a council significantly in terms of our carbon dioxide emissions. My scribbled note on the side was, well, but how have the population, the residents got on, and what are we doing to improve those? So it's a follow on from that, isn't it? It's not necessarily appropriate to ask you that question because it's not part of this report. I recognise that, but it's something which reminds us and we think about those things. So any other comments and questions from anybody on this particular report? And I've managed to lose the screen. I'm back again now. So otherwise, I don't think there is anybody else. So thank you, Jez, and thank you for the report, and thank you for fielding our questions.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Scrutiny.
Yeah. Item number 6, organisational recovery, work arising from COVID-19 recovery work. I've got, is it Zora? Are you on this one, or who is taking it?
I am.
Yeah, good.
I am,
Okay.
Chair.
I'll let you take it. Then.
Okay, thank you. So you've seen the report which has been circulated, which is a high-level report. And I think a couple of caveats I would attach to the report before I speak to it, Chair. One is that this report was written 2 weeks ago, and at the moment, 2 days in the local government world is an awfully long time. 2 weeks feels like a lifetime. So the report is, I will speak, as I speak to it, I'm speaking to it more from the present day rather than the situation 2 weeks ago. It's also worth just noting that when we talk about organisational recovery arising from COVID-19, that organisational recovery is done in the context of previous financial decisions which were taken by our cabinet that members are already aware of. So, for example, when we speak about the rationalisation of the office estate, those decisions predated the pandemic. So as a piece of recovery for the organisation, what we're doing is we're looking at how we recover, how we take the organisation forward in the context of the decisions that had been previously taken by the cabinet. So I just wanted to attach those caveats to it. So in terms of our recovery work, we've got an officer steering group which has been established, which is looking at the 3 key areas for us. It's our people, which is our most important resource. It's looking at our assets. A lot of the assets, as I've just said, are predetermined by earlier cabinet decisions that were taken. And of course, it's our systems. And if we look back over the last 15 months, there's been unprecedented changes that have taken place to us as an organisation, to the way that we deliver our services, and of course the way that we start to plan about how we take services forward. So what we're trying to do is to actually look at some of the opportunities that have arisen over the different ways that we've worked over the last 15 months, but to try and balance that in terms of what's best in terms of both service delivery and, of course, being financially prudent whilst we do so. So I've captured some statistics in just to give you some high-level figures, to give you a flavour of some of the changes that have taken place. So if we look at our people, we can see that sickness absence has reduced from an average of 11.26 days per full-time equivalent employee in 1920 to 8.13 days. Now, again, to put some context around that, we've changed the way that we work. And because we've been forced into having a significant proportion of our workforce working from home, we possibly have staff who are able to work from home, whereas previously they might not have felt well enough to come into the workplace, if that makes sense. So we just need to have some sort of caveats around some of those statistics so that we better understand them. I think I would also like to say, just on that point, Chair, that because I also chair the Council's Business Continuity Group, and since this report has been written, what we are seeing are some significant pressures now across a number of our systems. And members will all be aware, they've seen it in the newspapers and media, about pressures within our care system. We've got pressures within waste and recycling, which is partly driven by COVID, partly driven by HGV shortages. So there's a number of different elements coming into play now that are all impacting on the way that we actually take the organisation forwards. Interestingly, and whether we love it or hate it, the move to holding so many meetings online has actually delivered a significant saving in business mileage claims. And you can see on the report there that over 670,000 business miles that would have previously been claimed have been saved, with a financial saving of over £300,000 to the authority. Based on, and this is an analysis based on Department of Transport data, that's probably saved us 28,000 commuter hours. And I know, and I can speak from personal experience, and I'm sure that many of you will recognise this, that where I used to have a meeting and then have a half an hour or 45-minute drive to another part of the borough for the next meeting, someone's kindly now put an extra meeting in that slot for me. So you're on video calls and it does become back to back. But that's one of the positives that's come out of that saving from those commuter hours. In terms of our assets, there's been a 22% reduction in energy consumption across council buildings. But again, mindful that that's only part of the bigger picture, because yes, there's carbon emissions through the reduction in mileage, but also we need to recognise that the other side of that is that where people are working from home, there's possibly greater carbon emissions coming from domestic properties than we previously had. So these things are always much more complicated, aren't they, than we see. But in essence, the office accommodation strategy was agreed by our cabinet prior to the pandemic. But what we're actually looking at is how we better use our space within the buildings that we've still got. There will clearly be financial savings from releasing 3 large office buildings, and that's been Westgate House in Halifax, Horton Street in Halifax, and Cartwell Mills at Sorby Bridge. And what we're looking at then is how staff will work in the remaining space that's left. And it's getting that balance between, obviously, service delivery is a priority for us. The health and well-being of our staff is obviously paramount. And we need to understand how our staff can work most efficiently, most effectively, but also mindful of health and well-being. And and we're starting to see reports, aren't we, where people are staying in the household and being isolated, there can be health and sort of mental health and well-being issues that fall out of that. So it's looking at how we can best support our staff as well, and what that's. So I think really there isn't one size fits all. Each of the different services that we offer from the council have different delivery requirements. Some, of course, have to take place in a building or in a place, depending on what that service is. those that can be delivered remotely, we need to look at how we can be flexible and responsive to both service delivery and our staff needs within that. And then touching on our systems, I mean, I think we had probably 3 days where we actually managed to move over 1,500 staff to be able to work online, which was a huge achievement by our IT colleagues. I think realistically, I mean, we'd already embarked on the Microsoft 365 project shortly before the pandemic started. Had we known we were going into a pandemic, we might have actually tried to stall that project or do things differently. However, it actually enabled us to work differently very, very quickly, but it did have a number of pressures within it and a number of challenges that we had to overcome. And I think part of that is, and I think you're being honest, part of it is that IT equipment that was suitable for staff that work predominantly in office accommodation and only a small part of that time at home, the IT equipment that was suitable for that purpose is quite different to the IT equipment that's actually required to have staff working almost full time from home. So we've had to make significant investments in some of those areas as well. The new way of working, as I've said, has brought about significant savings. But as we're starting to go back into the office space, I've said it is responsive. So we're looking at members of staff. Some members of staff may go in 1 day a week. It could be 1 day a fortnight. For some teams, it could be going back into work full time. So we need to balance the needs of the individuals with the needs of the service. But what we're clear about is, as we do recover, we are still, in terms of Calderdale, whilst the restrictions have been relaxed, our rates in Calderdale have come down as they have across the country for COVID infections. What we're starting to see is that the COVID rates in Calderdale are settling, but they're still settling at quite a high rate. So we know that there's still a high level of transmission within our communities. So for our staff coming back into buildings, we're very mindful that we still need to create a safe working area for our staff. So we're still asking staff to wear face masks. We're still asking staff to make sure that they get tested, that they self-isolate if they're required to. And just to be mindful of other employees who may be in a different position to yourself, because I am aware that in terms of, for example, mask wearing, some opinions can be quite polarised, but it's about being mindful and, I guess, being kind and being concerned about other anxieties that other colleagues might have when we start to come together more in those office spaces. So a number of the physical changes that we've introduced, we're going to keep. And we're doing that for a number of reasons. Firstly, none of us know and can predict where we'll be in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic going into this autumn winter. We're also aware that in terms of just the way that we as a community interact with one another, things like colds and flus haven't been as virulent because we haven't been meeting. And as people start to come together, we can expect lots of other types of absences start to come back into play again. So where we've got physical screens that have been put in place, and one example is in our registrar's office at Spring Hall, there's the see-through screens being put in place. We will be leaving those in place for the foreseeable future. Once we're confident they're not needed, obviously we'll have a look at that. But what we don't want to do is to go to the expense of starting to remove some of those physical barriers that we've put in place and find ourselves putting them back in again in 4 or 5 months' time. So we want to actually avoid that. And we do recognise that they are effective in reducing transmission, not just of COVID-19, but of other transmissible infections as well. So in terms of the overall progress, clearly anything which requires a significant service change has gone through our cabinet and is a member decision which is taken as part of our future council reports. What I focused on today or this evening for you is just some of the high level things that we're looking at as part of our organisational recovery. And I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Thanks very much, Laura. I think it's important that we do recognise that what you said in your introduction, that this is a an evolutionary thing, and it's changing as we go. And I understand why you chose to almost go off piste, as it were, from the report in terms of giving us the more up-to-date information, which is totally understandable. One of the things which really stood out to me was point 1.4, where you're talking about things like capturing positive changes, ensuring they're not lost, checking on whether things are sustainable as they've evolved, or whether they're still desirable, what changes we want to retain and what changes we don't want to retain or are not appropriate anymore. So I recognise it's a development along those lines, and it's important that we look for the positives, look for the shortcomings, and deal with them accordingly. But opening up to officers and to members in terms of questions, would anybody like to ask a question, make an observation of Zora's presentation?
You've got Councillor Swift and then Councillor Sutherland and then Councillor Lee, please.
And Councillor Lee. So Councillor Swift, Megan, would you like to go?
Yes, and once again, perhaps not on the overview bit that I'm supposed to be at, but, you know, we talk about all the things we're going to do, and perhaps some people will go back into work for however many days and one thing and another. What rights have the employees if they don't want to do what we're offering? You know, because they've stuck with what we've done all the way through. But I know certain people, you know, you get somebody who works by themselves and lives by themselves, and you suddenly have a real problem on your hands. But I'm wondering what the process is going to be, because I can't see anything about unions in here at all. Okay, sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. And it's a really good point, I think, that you raised. And what we have been mindful of right the way through the pandemic, we have had some staff whose role has required them to be in an office place. We've had other staff who, for personal or for health and wellbeing reasons, haven't felt able to work at home or in a different location. So we've made arrangements for those staff to actually have allocated space within one of our office buildings. So what we are doing is, through our sort of staff network and through our staff survey, is we're asking staff what's good for them. So where possible, we will accommodate that and we will make appropriate adjustments. But we do that both in consultation with the staff. We have involved the trade unions. The trade unions have been very much on board with a number of the changes that we have made. But equally, and I'm, as a director, I would always say that we have to balance all of that along with service delivery, because that's what we're here for as well. And it's not easy, and it isn't one size fits all. And that's why this isn't going to be an overnight change. This is something which is incremental and has to be done with regard to what the current circumstances are at that time.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Sutherland, Councillor Lee and Councillor Metcalfe I've picked up so far. So we'll go to Dan Sutherland. Do you want to come in now?
I will do. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Zora. Thank you for your report. There is a lot of really good news in here, and thinking from the climate change and air quality perspective, which has come up already, these are the sorts of behavioural changes that were dreamed of a few years ago in terms of being able to have a real impact on those issues. So whilst it's a silver lining on what has been a very grey cloud of a period of time, I think that the more that we can help secure some of these reductions and keep them going, and I think that probably people would generally be supportive of reducing the amount of commuting they're doing and reducing the travel to meetings, etc. I think they probably would be quite popular, as long as we ensure we balance that out on the other side to make sure that we do the essential trips out to maybe see vulnerable children, or even when it comes to meetings, perhaps. I think that short informational gathering meetings on Teams can work really well, but sometimes people need to get around a table and strategize and have a deeper discussion, as well as the social side and just the small conversations that I think happen around a meeting, where you probably sort out 100 things in those 5 minutes and maybe 1 or 2 things in the actual meeting. So just making sure that we strike the right balance as we start to return. I wanted to pick up on the sickness absence. I mean, it's obviously really good to see that it's reduced, but I was a little bit astonished that during a pandemic, the sickness rates of our staff would actually reduce. So does this include sicknesses related to COVID-19?
Yeah, and I agree. And I think what we've seen is, you know, I guess there are days when you don't feel well enough to actually get up, leave the house, drive to the office, whereas actually you can switch on your computer and work from home. So that's been a real positive that's come out of it. But what we're seeing now, and I did touch on business continuity, so we're seeing quite a big variation across different services now in terms of some of that sickness absence. And you know, if we think about our waste and recycling service, and I don't want to turn into a discussion about missed bins, so I'll say it very quickly. But in terms of that service, you know, that's currently got high absence rates in terms of both COVID infections and in terms of people who've been asked to self-isolate as a result of contact with, and that's running at possibly 22% at the moment, so that's quite high. But we've got other staff who have been predominantly working from home and are probably still having limited contact with other people who sickness absence rates are much lower than they would have been on average previously. So we're seeing that balancing out across the organisation. We do have pockets where absence rates are higher than average. But overall, when you balance it out, the overall picture is that it's an improvement.
Mm. Thank you, Zora. You happy with that response there, Dan?
I am happy with that. Thank you, Chair. I would be. It might be a further discussion at some future date, but to understand better where that divide is, because I strongly suspect it's going to be the people in the lower paid jobs who are maybe having the higher rates or in those sectors, and it's those people working management who are going to be a bit better protected. And if this is an ongoing issue, I think it'd be something we might have to revisit a future date just to track the impact on staff.
Yeah, recognise that. Stephen, Councillor Lee, I think you're next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I just say I'm here to scrutinise, and I accept and agree with the excellent points that have been made by the previous two councillors, Swift and Sutherland. I think they're the very important points. And Zora, sorry. Good to see you again. I also acknowledge the tremendous work that you and your directorate have performed during absolutely terrible times. We all know that. But just one thing I would like to mention, it is being a bit pedantic perhaps, but of all of the reports that are sent to all of the various committees and panels, the importance of accuracy in reports to this scrutiny panel is very important. And you've referred to it in terms of high-level statistics that we expect to be reported on correctly. And I'm just going to pick out one thing that just undermines that, because I'm sure the vast majority of statistics in this report will be accurate. But when there's what seems like a glaring anomaly, I have to raise it, because if it's not a glaring anomaly, there's something wrong. And that is, under systems at 2.7, it seems like we proudly boast that 41,000 Microsoft Teams meetings have been organised. Now, I'm assuming that means for 41,000 attendees, some Microsoft Teams meeting have been arranged. And it's a very different statement as it's reading there. And the reason I'm worried about it, and I can see you're amused by it already, but if we have indeed had 41,000 Teams meetings instead of actual meetings, then I think we'd all be very alarmed. So, Zora, can you confirm that, what have I written down? Team meetings for 41,000 attendees have been arranged.
You're absolutely right, and I apologise for not being clear in the report. It's 41,000 Teams attendances at meetings. Yes.
Thank you.
Good. We've got that clear then. That's fortunate. Bob, you're next on my list.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think one or two comments I was going to make have already been made. In fact, when you started, Chair, on this item, you did mention particularly the importance, I think, of paragraph 1.4, which I also thought was particularly important, of how the importance on recognising changes that we do probably want to retain and build on, as that paragraph suggests. I just wanted to just clarify just the decision-making progress. It just the past steering group make final decisions on these kinds of issues. Or is there another? What's a decision-making pathway just to from past steering group considering these to actually seeing them being implemented? And just final comment. I know that Zora's mentioned that looking at 2 weeks is a long time to consider various things, but I really was concerned about the implications on para 3.5, which rightly says the relentless increase in workforce absence. And I just wonder, I might have missed it when you spoke on this, Zora, but has that started to improve again now?
Thank you. And so, in terms of decision making, PAS reports back into our corporate leadership team meeting and can then make recommendations. And in terms of what the corporate leadership team does, if it's day-to-day operational management decisions, then those decisions are taken by the corporate leadership team. Where those decisions have service implications or changes in terms of, terms and conditions or anything else like that, then they would actually then go through to either our governance committee or into cabinet. So there'd be a political input at that point at the appropriate time for those decisions. If it's for example, which teams are in which building on which days of the week, then they're operational decisions. If it's about a fundamental service delivery change or a policy change, then that's a member decision. So that's how we differentiate between those. And then your other point about sickness absences, and this goes back to, I think, the point I said earlier about how we are seeing that range of different absence rates across different parts of the organisation, and it changes on a daily basis. So, for example, last week for 2 days I had to close the transport office because I had no staff. I couldn't open it safely because there weren't any staff there. Fortunately, we were able to manage the workload so we could actually work around it and then do extra after it. I've mentioned waste and recycling. The absence rates are they're particularly high at the moment. Yeah. And that's partly because, yes, it's COVID related. Yes, it's related to the isolation. It's also related to the fact that these people have worked flat out now in extremely challenging circumstances for 15 months. The job's been much harder than it was to start with, and it was already very physically demanding job. If you look at the heat wave we had a couple of weeks ago, if you're working on that wagon during that heat wave, if you're then asked to do overtime to help catch up because of those staff shortages, physically you haven't got it in you, and that's perfectly understandable. So those are the sorts of issues that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Where we can move staff around, we will do it. But of course, what we're starting to find is that all of the services have some level of absence. If we might look at bringing in agency workers, again, we're getting similar issues there where people don't have the staff to bring people in. So it is challenging. I'm hoping that as we move through August, things will start to improve. But of course, and I made the point at the very beginning that, 2 weeks is a long time in the current world at the moment, but actually even 2 days, things can change. They can deteriorate rapidly. They can actually get better rapidly as well. It's not all bleak. So it's both.
Thanks, Zora. Bob, are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you very much.
Councillor Barnes, Mike, I think you've got a yellow hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A couple of things. I'm first of all, I'm glad that you did mention mental health in your opening conversation. I think that's particularly relevant in relation to 2.7 and 3.8. In other words, the number of Teams meetings and also the change in digitalisation. We are, by our very nature, tending to be socially interactive, and not having that social intercourse and social interaction face to face. I think is very detrimental to long-term mental health, and I think it's understated. And I think these are going from it. I've got a couple of questions. I think some of the statistics didn't surprise me, but some did. I think a 22% reduction in energy consumption seems low, bearing in mind the amount of time that people were out of the office and the number of people in the office. And I think we therefore need to review our energy consumption across council buildings. Are we therefore leaving lights on, equipment on unnecessarily when people aren't available? I appreciate there are times that we might need to leave lights on, but I think that's something that we need to really actively consider, because it does seem rather low, bearing in mind the number of hours that people were working from home versus working in the office. And I think the other point as well is especially as we are meant to be moving towards a paperless society or a paperless office. 50% reduction last year once again seems low, and I think we do need to look at ways in which we discourage people to print papers unnecessarily. I think probably as councillors we are probably guilty of printing often and bringing papers to meetings, especially when not. But I still think those are two factors that I think we really need to be looking at going forward, as to why the reductions last year weren't as much as I would have thought they would have been, and what we can do to improve them even more. Thank you. And I think the chair's left, so I don't know who's... I've just seen Lauren panic then.
Zora, do you want to come back? And then if Councillor Evans hasn't joined us, I'll hand over to Councillor Metcalfe as deputy to chair. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
I fully accept the points that you've made. I think it's worth remembering, though, that whilst we've had a huge amount of our workforce working from home, equally, we've actually had staff in buildings still delivering services. So if we think about our registrar service, some of our key social work staff, some of our key environmental health staff, our staff that monitor the CCTV provision, and our community protection teams. So actually there's been a lot of, a significant number of staff who have still been going into buildings. So that's possibly partly why the emissions aren't as high as you might have expected them to be. But we'll certainly get colleagues in CAFM to do a more detailed breakdown, if that would be helpful. In terms of printing, I think you're preaching to the converted. I absolutely agree with the points that you've made. But equally, I've been one of those people. I've always found paper very comforting, and it's difficult sometimes to move to doing something new. So, and I think the point was already made. I think earlier on, I think it was by yourself or not. But, the cultural change that we've achieved in the last 15 months, we probably wanted to achieve 5 years ago, but it's taken the pandemic to get us to this point and to prove that some of these changes that we've made are actually workable and manageable.
Yeah, can I just come back? I think that's why I used the word discourage. That was a deliberate choice of words. It's about discouraging. I remember, I think it was the old General Electric when they tried to move paperless, and many years ago they found that they couldn't change human behaviour, and in the end what they did is they linked everybody's computer to a printer that was at the other end of the building. So when people had to print something, they had quite a considerable effort to go and get that piece of paper. So people weren't just printing that single page email, that single page memo, and they had to actively discourage. And that's why I was very specific on that choice of word. I'm also padding on the hope that Councillor Evans comes back, but there we go. Thank you, Vice Chair. Now I think, is it?
Hi. it quite embarrassing when IT goes wrong, it goes wrong, because apart from myself, everyone else is frozen. So somebody's indicating I won't be able to see them unless they put something in chat. I didn't want to risk leaving and trying to rejoin. So I'll be struggling a little bit, unfortunately.
I'm back in now, Bob. I'm back in now, Bob. Thank you.
Right. Well, my screen's apart from myself, mine's frozen as well. So the joys of IT. It always goes wrong at the wrong. It always goes wrong at the wrong time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Shall I take on again?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for stepping in.
Well, didn't really.
So I don't think I can see anybody else. Lauren, have we got somebody else who was asking? No. Good. Thank you.
No, not as far as I've seen.
Good. I've just got one question, a detailed question myself. In 2.6, you're talking about the workplace office accommodation strategy, meaning that we can release 3 large office buildings, resulting in a significant revenue saving. Great. Do we know yet what's going to happen to those buildings, or is that something for another day?
I don't know.
No, fair enough. I'll follow that up in a different way. Okay. So if there are no other questions on this, all I would do is sort of summarise and say that clearly we need to be looking at maintaining and improving the service, which is what you're working at and what you've made very clear in this particular report. And there are key areas like mental health, and I was going to comment that didn't seem to be very evident in the report, but you brought that up verbally, which I think was very important. I think Councillor Barnes mentioned that as well. And I think the important other aspect is the staff consultation thing, because people have different needs, differences in the way they can operate and work flexibly. And that's the word, isn't it? Flexibility is looking at how we do that, and we gain the benefits that we've learned. These things have been forced to learn very, very quickly, and we've done very well. Most of us have done very well at achieving that, and we need to look at what we want to retain and what we can improve, and how overall it will improve the overall operation. So thank you very much for your report. Thank you for your verbal additions, which I think were very important. Any other comments from anybody else? No? Thank you, Zora. We'll move on to item 7. Thank you. Financial resilience. And I think Nigel Broadbent, you're going to do this one for us, are you?
Yes, and given my previous experience, can I just check that everybody can hear me?
I can hear you.
Good. That's a good start.
Yes.
Okay. In terms of the report that's been circulated, it was a report that was requested by Audit Committee and went to the meeting last week. Very topical, given the concerns expressed about a number of local authorities and their financial resilience over the last 12 months in particular. So the first part of the report tries to set out the national context, in effect. It starts by talking about the fact that the government had to issue capitalisation directives to 8 local authorities. And all that means is that they allowed those local authorities to borrow for revenue purposes. Now, that's something that local authorities generally cannot do. They can borrow for capital purposes, but revenue has to be funded through council tax, business rates, etc. But they gave permission for 8 local authorities, because of their financial difficulties, to actually borrow to shore up their revenue budget. Now, obviously, that's a short-term measure, and that money has to be paid back, but it helped those local authorities, those particular local authorities at that time. There were also 3 public interest reports from external auditors about the local authorities that they audited, expressing concerns about the financial position of those local authorities. And in the case of 3 other local authorities, the Chief Finance Officer issued Section 114 notices. And those are notices that are set out in legislation that basically say when the Head of Finance or the Chief Finance Officer believes that the budget is not balanced for the local authority, then he has to issue a notice to the council that says that there is an immediate kind of restraint on spending in that local authority, and that decisions on spending are made by the Chief Finance Officer rather than members for a period of time while the council puts an action plan in place to try and address its financial difficulties. So that's the severity of the position and why it's effectively the ultimate sanction that a Chief Finance Officer has and doesn't want to actually use at any time. But the fact that 3 of those were issued last year shows the difficulty in local government finance at the moment. The report actually sets out a bit more information about some of the issues in Slough, for example, which was the most recent Section 114 notice, and also some of the lessons learned in Northamptonshire County Council. And those are the lessons learned that were in the external commissioners report was brought in by government. The lessons learned that could apply to other local authorities that are experiencing financial difficulties. So that's some of the context and the reasons why local government is in this position, which is really a combination of things, which is austerity, it's the COVID position, it's issues around governance in certain local authorities. It's usually a combination of those things rather than one specific factor. The second part of the report then tries to look a bit more at the local context. What's our position in Calderdale? I've referred in the report to CIPFA's Resilience Index, and this is something that CIPFA developed to try and help Chief Finance Officers to delve into some of the risk areas in local authority finance and to try and understand where they might actually look into this in more detail. So the first item, probably the first indicator I'll probably refer to is reserves, which I know I've talked to you probably at length in previous meetings, but really just to say there that in terms of CIPFA's index, in the last published data, Calderdale was in a position where we had £30 million worth of earmarked reserves. So those are earmarked reserves, earmarked for specific purposes, where they're known or predicted events that we have to set money aside for. In addition to that £30 million, it had Calderdale had £5.5 million worth of general balances. So those are reserves set aside for unforeseen events, which could be anything. The end of the last financial year, we got to a position where earmarked reserves have gone up to £59 million and balances have gone up to £5.8 million. So there is a significant improvement there. I should put a caveat on that. The earmarked reserves are there for a specific purpose. So a lot of that funding increase relates to COVID funding that's been provided by government that we've carried forward to use in this year because some of the ongoing pressures. But what it does do is when local authorities are in difficulties, they can use reserves on a short-term basis to help balance the budget, but in the knowledge that they'll have to replenish them at a later stage. In addition to the reserves, the other indicator I'll probably pick out is borrowing. And the reason for that is that it's something that there's been a lot of focus on, again, nationally. Whereas Calderdale was in a relatively high risk position in terms of its reserves, in terms of borrowing, it's classed, according to CIPFA's Resilience Index, as relatively low risk. And that's because there's only one metropolitan district that's got a lower level of external borrowing than Calderdale, and there's 3 that have got a lower level of interest as a proportion of its budget. So that's classed as a low risk. And the reason I mentioned this is the government just this week has, it's not consultation at this stage, has said that it intends to change the capital framework for local government. And one of the things it's looking at is using the CIPFA Resilience Index to restrict and cap the amount of borrowing by local authorities where it considers it to be extreme or excessive. So the fact that we're in a position where we're classed as relatively low risk, hopefully that will be in our favour. So that's one of the reasons I bring that out, because that's quite current since the report was actually written. It's something that's been certainly discussed this week. In terms of, I won't go through any more of the detail within the report, but in terms of what you might take from this report as a conclusion, it is hopefully a picture of where I think Calderdale is in terms of its financial position at the moment. But when I looked at the papers for this meeting, it talked about the purpose of this was partly to inform members when it gets to see finance reports in the future, in the next few meetings. So what I'd probably suggest to yourselves is that some of the key issues within here, the key points to look for in future reports, are around the council's reserves position and whether they are being used or not, in terms of whether the council's delivering on its savings that's been agreed. And when we get around to next year's budget process, whether the savings that are agreed as part of next year's budget are robust. I have to sign them off as being robust, but clearly members might take a view on whether they consider that the savings put forward by any group as part of the budget next year have to be deliverable and robust. So those are some of the key messages, I suppose, that's coming out of the lessons learnt in other authorities, where they've run down their reserves to a level that if there is a problem, they haven't got anything to address those difficulties in the short term. They haven't been delivering on savings targets, and some of the savings have not been deliverable in the first place. And with that in mind, I'll pause and invite questions, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you very much. It's very sobering, isn't it, this particular item? And thank you for your clear exposition. Even for a non-accounting person like me, it really brings the points home, so I appreciate that. And I think your summary in relation to pointing us in the direction of the use of reserves, savings being delivered, and future savings, whether they are projected future savings, whether they are robust ones, I think they are all critical, clear, key areas, aren't they, which I thank you for reminding us about. I suppose the bottom line from my point of view is, can we be assured we're not in the position of Slough? Would be my first question. You seem reasonably confident that we're not. Nigel, can you comment on that one for me, and I'll open the book up?
Yeah, if I may, in terms of, without going into the particular problems in Slough, what I have to think about all the time as part of my role and statutory responsibilities is the financial governance, the financial affairs, the position of the council. I'm satisfied at the moment. I haven't had to take any further action. I talked about Section 114 notices, etc. My responsibility is to make sure that I advise the council at all times that if I think the financial position of the council is getting into a position where it has to take immediate action, or even action in the medium term, then I will give that advice. So I'd never actually turn around and say, I have no concerns. It's all about the financial position. But I think I can say at this time, I'm not in a position where I'm saying to elected members that we have to take any immediate action to improve the council's position. It's constant monitoring, but if the position changes for whatever reason, then clearly I will inform members immediately.
Thank you for that reassurance, shall we say. I understand the context in which you gave it. So I have Councillor Lee, Councillor Metcalfe and Councillor Swift, certainly so far. Stephen, do you want to head off? You're the first I noticed.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And Nigel, thank you for the report, which is, as always, very precise and comprehensive. And this evening, I want to actually not argue with anything that you've said, but I want to pick out some of the things that you have said with which I absolutely agree. And I want to emphasize them to this scrutiny panel because I think they're important. The first thing is, as we've already heard, and as you've said in the report, at 4.2, you refer to slough, and it refers to the danger of running down reserve levels. Leave it at that. It says that at 4.2. Clearly it happens. Clearly there are dangers of it happening. Now, the other thing is I've had a few arguments about debt and borrowing and reserves at various meetings lately. The reserves that I refer to as reserved, actually later on in your report, Nigel, right at the very end at 4.8, you confirm the reserves as being what I believe they are, where it says this confirms our true reserve target is 5 million, but presently it stands at 5.8 million, right? That is what I consider what the council agreed the reserve would be, 5 million. And you've explained tonight that's for, you know, really unexpected events. But earlier this week at Cabinet, we heard about expenditure that's being planned right now, where I was told, the meeting was told, that we plan to pay for certain things from reserves. Now, we're all aware that we do have these financial balances of money that's allocated for something else, but nevertheless can be considered available for cash flow in the short term. And I think you've explained that. But the danger with that is, you know, it could be considered borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, in that you can only do that for a little while, because when those allocated demands on that capital come around, if you keep using it for reserves, it's gone. And then the problems start. And again, I wanted to commend to the scrutiny panel this evening that it's not just Slough, and this is the worry I think Ashley just mentioned. You've mentioned other places that have they have the problems now, and presumably they have conscientious people like there are on this scrutiny panel that somehow have let it pass them by. And what I know you want to do, Nigel, and I do, we just want to make absolutely certain that none of us are letting any of this pass us by. And it's places like Eastbourne, Luton, Peterborough, Redcar, Wirral. These aren't mugs that are running these places. These are people that have got into difficulty because of running down reserves, as you've said. So my final point is that in 4.8, you mention the very thing that I've been criticised by some for arguing about preoccupation on my part with running down reserves and borrowing more money. But in 4.8, you say that in 2019-20, alarm bells were already sounding, because it says Calderdale, I quote, was at high risk in terms of its reserve sustainability. And that was then. So that also confirms, as I said earlier, that we're down near the 5 million mark now. And so all I'm saying to the rest of the scrutiny panel, we should be very much aware of this, and none of us can take anything for granted. And any time that we're spending out of reserve, however well intentioned and however well we might think it's covered by money that's there but is accounted for in due course, we could get in trouble. So please let us monitor this very, very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Metcalfe, Bob, you, I think, the next one I noticed.
Right, yes, thank you, yes. I was going to ask, I think perhaps it has been answered, the first point. I've just one or two things to run through quickly. And that was on the SITFA Resilience Index for 2020-21, when it was going to be available. I think Nigel may have said it's already become available this week. I'm just not sure on that. I just wanted also then to just particularly Councillor Lees mentioned 4.8, section 4.8. I was going to start and just mention section 4.9 again that has been mentioned by Nigel, because reading 4.9 I think does give us some assurance on what it says. The council on relatively low proportion of the net revenue expenditure on gross external debt and interest payable compared with other Mets. So that certainly gives us some assurance. Because I thought in 4.8, when I just look on Calderdale's reserves positions, which the report says has improved at the 31st of March 2021, the overall level of reserves stood at 59 million, plus 5.8 million in general fund balances. The 5.8 is a 5 million a minimum of 5 million we do set aside each year for unexpected events, particularly unexpected events, etc. But the total reserves at 59 million. So I think we just we need to make sure we keep these figures in mind, because the general comment I wanted to make was on the word and meaning of reserves in a council financial context, because it's difficult for members to really, to be honest, to fully understand and grapple with these fairly complex financial issues, but even more so to try to get the public interested and understanding just what the reserves are, because I'm sure that members have heard over the years, I certainly have at walk forums and other places, when an issue regarding needs more funding crops up, the kind of comment, well, you've got some reserves, why don't you use those? And that's happened more than once at meetings I've attended, even at budget consultation meetings, when this area, really try to be explained just what our reserves are for and the use of them. So especially in these difficult financial times, I think anything more we can do, like at budget consultations, to inform and explain the use and purpose of not just reserves, but the whole context of how we use those reserves will be useful.
Thank you, Bob. Any responses to that, Nigel? Yes?
Yeah, just if I may, Chair, in terms of the first question about the resilience index, it's available all the time, but it's updated each year with the latest outturn information. So when I've said that our reserves, for example, has gone from 22% of our budget to 33% of the budget, that's because I know what our outturn position was for the last financial year. What I don't know is everybody else's. SIPFA will update this once the national data has been produced and verified. I suspect it will be late this year. It might be something like November time before we get the update. So I've put forward Calderdale's figures because I know what those are. Yeah. What I don't know is what the reserves position of every other local authority in the country has done. The second point, I suppose, is about the reserves, and just to, I suppose, confirm what I said before, is we make a distinction between the general fund balances, which is standing at 5.8 million at the moment, and those are for unforeseen events. So that's a crisis that might arise that we hadn't foreseen at all and hadn't provided any money for. So that's what that's for. And we've said that that should at all times always remain above £5 million. On top of that, we have earmarked reserves, and that's the £59 million, which are there for specific purposes. So the events that we know will happen, we don't necessarily always know how much it's going to cost. So we have £7 million set aside in the insurance reserve, for example. We don't know exactly how much we might have to pay out in future on insurance claims. You know, I hope it's nothing, but we have to reserve monies just in case some claims are made against the council. And each reserve we go through on that basis and review them regularly. And certainly towards the budget time, I will be reviewing all the earmarked reserves again and looking at them and thinking, first of all, do we still need that reserve? Secondly, is it the appropriate amount of money? And those are probably the key factors. The final point I should say on that is, whilst SITFA and the Resilience Index uses reserves as a measure of resilience. The figure may, for example, reduce next year because, as I said before, part of those reserves are COVID funding that we carried forward from last year. We intend to use those this year, which means the reserves will go down. So it's important that the index is used as that, as a means of prompting questions. So if at the end of the next financial year you see that reserves, earmarked reserves, have gone down, then I think it's quite right you would be asking me, can you explain why it's gone down? Has our risk as a result of that increased, and so on? So as I say, it's an indicator, an index, not necessarily something that will say, yes, we're more at risk because those reserves have reduced. It's the reasons behind that. And as I say, I do review them, well, not only as part of the budget, but at year end and as part of the revenue monitor. And where I think there are reserves that I think can be released into general balances, then I will inform members of that and put it forward as part of either the budget process or as part of the revenue monitor to say, actually, we don't think we need to set aside all that money. We'll release it into general balances, which then can be used for unforeseen events. Sorry if that's a lengthy explanation, but
we can't complain about it not being clear or specific. Thank you, Nigel. Bob, did you put your hand up again? Did you want to come back on that? Or? No.
No,
okay.
I've taken my hand down, haven't I? Yeah.
Right. Okay. You have now. Yes, I just saw it earlier. Megan, you think you're next on my list?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
This is just a simple question. Investments by the council. I believe over the last few years, it's changed what we could actually do. So if we, I don't know, saw something that we thought was really, really good, that we could do and we could make money, there are now so many, I can't think of the word, but it's difficult for the council to take thought of. So if the council had a shopping bit of the town which was up for sale and they thought they could do a good job of it, we wouldn't be allowed to do it, would we?
The position is now that local authorities can't borrow for financial gain, for yield. So if we were buying a shopping centre or investing in a shopping centre, we couldn't do that purely to make money. Now, there might be powers that the local authority has to borrow money to do something for other purposes, if it was part of a regeneration scheme, for example, but it has to be something that the council has powers to do. We can't borrow simply now to make money as an investment. That's something that's been kind of recently legislated against, and it's something obviously that lots of local authorities have done over recent years, and it's part of the reason why the government now is changing the capital framework again to say that it's thinking about capping the amount of local authority borrowing to make sure that local authorities don't go out and borrow large amounts, significant amounts of money to fund investment in things which will perhaps generate income to the council. As I say, it's not something that the government wants local authorities to continue to do.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cook, Jacob, you've had to wait a while, but I've got to you. Fire away, please.
Yeah, not a problem, Chair, thanks. I just wanted to ask Nigel, it says in the report that reserves were increased from 34.7 million to 59 million, and that was from 2020 to 2021. So I just wanted to ask, that's an increase of over 25 million. But bearing in mind, at a time of supposed, where all the councils struggling to, all the excuses we're getting is, the council doesn't have enough money to do this, council doesn't have enough money to do that, can't do this because we haven't got enough money, staff levels are down, problems with this department because we haven't got enough money. So how has the council managed to, locate £25 million to increase the reserves? It just looks like it's a knee-jerk reaction, sort of, done because there was a worry. and we would suddenly manage to find 25 million. So could you just explain how that's the case? Because it doesn't seem to, in my mind as a layperson, it just looks unreal that they could lay their hands on that level of money so quickly. So could you answer that?
Yeah, because again, this is the context behind it. The reserves have gone up. As I mentioned before, one of the big reasons is COVID funding from government. So we've carried forward around £10 million, £6 million of general COVID funding and £4 million of specific funding for purposes relating to COVID again. We've carried that money forward from last year into this year because the costs will be incurred in this year. So it's ongoing pressures around dealing with the pandemic. So that's a large part of the increase. Another large part of it is there's around just short of £11 million worth of business rates funding, reimbursement from government for business rates funding, which we will utilise this year. So it's in effect prepayment of funding that we will use in the current financial year. And that's why I perhaps laboured the point about if the reserves go down at the end of this year, don't necessarily think that the council is being profligate at all. Those monies have been set aside for specific purposes and will be used. Not everything will be used this year because some of the reserves, like I say, the insurance reserves, some of the capital investment reserves will be used in later years, in much later years. But we certainly intend to use some of the reserves this year because they are for current budget pressures around the pandemic in particular. So that's, as I say, that's why the increase is such. It's not that the council's decided to go out and find £25 million from somewhere. It's because those monies have come in, we've accounted for them properly, we carry them forward and we use them this year because we're already highlighting in the revenue monitor, for example, that we have £6 million worth of COVID related costs already this year, additional costs. That money that's brought forward in the reserves will be used for that purpose. So whilst it's a good thing that the reserves have increased, they are earmarked for specific purposes. So it goes back to my initial point that if we use them we should look at what's the overall level of reserves that gives us enough resilience to cope with anything that's unforeseen.
Thank you. Silver, I've noticed you've got your hand up, but I've got Mike, Councillor Barnes as well now. So, Mike, do you want to come in first?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. I'm not sure I'm reading the same report as other people, in a sense that what this report again is a good indicator of what we as scrutiny members should be looking at going forward. But also, I think we seem to ignore the point in the report in relation to 4.9. And we seem to continually refuse to accept the point of 4.9. Yes, and I raised this at council 18 or so months ago regarding the fact that we need to, when we say we are going to make savings, we need to make sure we measure those savings and make sure those savings are continued. Valid point on that one. But the simple fact is that we seem to confuse the difference between capital and revenue. You know, the fact that we have one of the lowest proportions of net revenue expenditure on gross external debt and interest payable is a very good thing. One of the big issues with other councils that have got into this situation is they've overborrowed and they've had poor management and lack of scrutiny. I do not believe that we have poor management. I do not believe that we have lack of scrutiny, and I don't believe we've overborrowed. So I'm just wondering why we just do not, why we're not focused on some of those issues. Let's not forget. Sorry, I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Nigel, do you want to come back on that?
No, I don't think there's anything I can add to that. I'm happy to take any further questions if that's okay.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to give you the opportunity if you wish to do so. So the only other hand I have at the moment is Councillor Dacre. Sylvia, do you want to come in now?
Yes. Just to say very briefly that I'd like those listening to be reassured that the council does take the issue of its reserves and its general fund balances very seriously indeed. And that's why it is agreed that they must be maintained at that current level of £5 million for the time being, and obviously look to build them up where we possibly can. That was agreed at the time of last year's budget, and I think probably budgets before that as well. But I'd just like members of the public to be clear that it is something that is taken very seriously, and that's why that decision was made.
Thank you for that. So in terms of summarising, yes, I go back to what I said right at the beginning after Nigel had done his first introduction. It's a very sobering situation, but I think certainly for me, his detailed comments suggest a level of confidence. It makes me feel confident we're not rapidly heading down the slough route. I was going to make reference also to the item 5.1, which Councillor Barnes mentioned. So he's done that for me. Thank you very much. I think there's one very positive thing in there, a number of positive things, but in particular, it's the sort of resilience index part of it, where we've moved very significantly from March 20 to March 21, which makes one feel a little bit more comfortable with the difficult situation we find ourselves in. I think also I would emphasise the invest to save element of it, whereby we're using funds to save money rather than just speculating to accumulate, as it were, which of course we're not allowed to do really now. And as far as I'm concerned, in 5.1, I think we need to look at that and take that on board, the option which is thrown in there. The council could decide that authorities should increase the level of general fund balances available to address any unforeseen financial issues, or increase the level of earmarked reserves to meet likely or expected financial issues. The important phrase is the next bit, which says, this would, however, require the council to identify and deliver additional savings as part of the budget process. So, yes, I think it might be an option, but we need to take into account the second part of that statement very clearly, I think. And I think the introduction of the resilience index is an interesting tool. And I'd be interested to see that on an ongoing basis and be reminded of the progress in relation to that. So apart from that, I think we've given Nigel a good grilling on these things. So thank you, members, for doing so. But thank you also, Nigel, for your detailed and clear responses. Thank you. So there we are. That's the main substantive item. We only have one more, really, which is the work programme. We did have some gaps in it. We're beginning to fill them. Mike, Lauren, do you want to comment on that? We've already looked at one aspect that we're looking at introducing to the September meeting. We're also looking at changing the date of the September meeting. Perhaps you could just remind us of those two issues to start with, please.
Yeah, so just first of all, members, we've been asked if there's any chance that we can move strategy and performance from the 8th of September to the 1st. So if everybody's agreeable, we can make that change. That's just due to capacity issues within the committee admin team. And
so does anybody have any problems with that date change?
Councillor Lee's got his hand raised, Chair, and Councillor Porritt.
Can't see anybody.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Chair. I do have a problem with that because the next day we've got a by-election that we're fighting in my ward, actually. And I think we should only change the date of meetings that are laid down at the start of the council year under exceptional circumstances. Everybody will be affected by a change of this date to any other date. In my case, I'm affected by something that's very important to me and indeed to Calderdale. A by-election is taking place the next day. We've got to fight that. And Also, other things that are in my diary and everybody else's will be affected by a change. So I think we just ought to get on and have the meeting on the 8th, like we said. That's my view. Thank you.
Okay. Lauren, Mike, do you have any responses to?
I think Councillor Porritt had a point to make.
Sorry, yes, okay, I missed that one. So
only to say that I would need a sub, but I'm happy to go with the majority opinion. I'm sure we can draft in Mike or somebody again.
Not the dreaded Mike Barnes. Mike Lodge, you wanted to come in.
I think, if I may, Chair, I think Councillor Lee makes a really good point about it being the day after at least one, or the day before at least one by-election, and I don't think we took that into account when we thought about the dates. Lauren and I will we'll make arrangements to cover for the committee admin team, and we'll leave the dates where it is, which I think is actually, if I may move on, Councillor Evans, there was one suggested additional item that I was just thinking would be quite hard to do on the 1st of September. And following some correspondence between Councillor Evans and Councillor Cook, it's been suggested that we should have an additional item on the work programme. I'm looking away to read something because I need to get the wording right, about the use of the health protection coronavirus restrictions, local authority enforcement powers and amendments regulations 2020. And I think I've got that right, but it's basically the additional powers that the council has been given to enforce some of the with businesses in particular, some of the regulation, some of the constraints under coronavirus, and to just have a look at how the council has implemented that and its approach to that. So I'm just drawing that to your attention, members, as a proposed addition to the work programme. We could fit that in September, so long as, to be fair to the report authors, we've given them sufficient time during August to produce a report. So it may be in September, or it may be at a later date, but subject, unless anybody objects, Lauren and I will build that into the work programme.
I mean, I'm certainly very keen to include this item. It's something that my group have had concerns about, so I wanted some feedback on, and it's interesting to note that a member of the Conservative group has brought this forward as well. So certainly I would certainly support looking at this item on our agenda in the future. Any other comments though from other members? You happy with that? Okay, let's leave that to Mike and Lauren then to look at the timings for those who would have to contribute towards that item on the agenda and see where it then fits in with the work programme.
I think Councillor Metcalfe was indicating, Chair.
Sorry, missed that one. Bob, sorry.
No, it wasn't really on that one. So I just look at that, just understand more about that when I see it, appear on the work programme.
Yeah.
And just a couple of items. I thought, just on the work programme, there was on the minutes from the last meeting, it was suggested that we have a report some stage on digital democracy. I think that was suggested at that and minuted as such. So I just wondered if that can be looked at further. And the other one, sorry.
Sorry, I was saying I would certainly be interested in that. Sorry, carry on, Bob.
Yeah, it came out of the previous meeting, and it was a suggestion, and I thought we should be picking that suggestion up and doing that. And the other item, unless I'm wrong on this, do I understand that the last council, all the parties agreed that the resolution on the payday on payday loans review should come to this committee to be reviewed, to this board to be reviewed and then report back. I think it was more or less passed on to this S&P Scrutiny board to look into.
That was my intent.
Is that going to appear on the work programme at some stage?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something we've requested. It's something that the council has requested we do.
Indeed.
If I've got it right.
Yeah, Councillor Barnes indicated then, Stephen, Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I need to liaise with Councillor Lee and Councillor Baker in producing that, but I would have thought, bearing in mind the urgency of it, we'd probably like it to be brought to the September meeting. Stephen, would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that, Mike. What happened, if people don't know, we all came at this from slightly different angles, but all agreed that this is a very important thing. And it's not just the payday lenders that are the official ones that are problematic. It's the loan sharks and the people that are lending money and you know, getting people in all sorts of trouble. So we all share a view that this has we've got to take some action. So Mike Barnes is completely correct. We should get together very soon, decide where we're taking it, and include it on the agenda for this scrutiny panel as soon as we possibly can.
Yeah, well, we'll ask Lauren and Mike to look at that one for us. Mike, did you want to come back on that?
I was just going to say exactly what you said, Councillor Evans.
All right, good stuff. And the other, I've got notes here referring to having had a look at the cabinet meeting minutes. There are 2 or 3 references there to items coming to S&P scrutiny, capital programme monitoring, capital outturn report and revenue monitoring, where I think were all referenced in the cabinet minutes, suggesting that they should come to S&P. Am I correct in that? Yeah, Mike.
I think from memory, I've not got the minutes open in front of me, but they were the regular references on monetary reports.
Yes.
So we've got those. I think we've got those
anyway,
in our heads, if not on the programme. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we'd picked it up as part of it. Cross-checked it anyway. Any other thoughts on work programme from any other members?
Could I just come back on one other item following the report? Following the report that Zora had on today, I know she was suggesting that a further report comes back in the autumn, but we've penciled in, haven't we, some sessions in the work programme on people, assets and systems.
Yes.
Are we agreeing? I don't know if that takes the place of a further report, or we're intending to look at those separately. It's just are we agreeing on the work programme that we are picking those up later in the year?
Lauren,
if I can, Chair, just briefly. So there's sort of 2 options really. We can do it as Zora said, if we come back in the autumn and we can have a report on that, or we could chunk it down and sort of look at the people, the assets and the systems. So that's really up to members and as to how you want to do it, and also timescales. So we'd need to work with Zora around which one we do first and when. So that's entirely up to yourselves, and we can build that in.
Yeah, I mean, I'd certainly be interested in looking at them in 3 separate tranches rather than overall. I think gives them more opportunity to look at things in depth. But what are other views?
Yeah, I think that'd probably be the best way, and they're spaced out then in the work programme. It's you know, it gives us more an in-depth on a particular topic area.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any comments on that?
I'm okay with that.
Yep, good. Okay. So does that cover us for the work programme for now? Good stuff. I've got a thumbs up from Lauren. So I can say to everybody, thank you very much for your inputs, officers, members. Thank you for that, and look forward to seeing you in later in September, not earlier as originally proposed. Good to see you all anyway. Good night.
Thank you, Chair. Good night all.
Thank you.